Welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to be replacing the crankshaft position sensor on my 2004 Chevrolet SSR pickup, which has a 5.3 liter LM4 engine in it, and that was available in the 2003 and 4 model years of the Chevrolet SSR, and the same exact procedure applies to the 2005 and 6 SSR that came with the 6 liter, because the reluctor tooth count in the early generation 4 version of the LS2 is also 24 tooth, so the same crankshaft position sensor would be used for that. So after the introduction and information disclaimer, we'll go through which part I'm using, what other tools I'll need to replace the crankshaft position sensor, and what I have to take out of the way. And then at the end, the service manual requires you to go through a crankshaft position sensor relearn process. So I have an Autel MaxiSys MS906 to perform that procedure for me today. So let's get to work. Please review the automotive information, repair, and modification guidelines on this screen. Seek the advice of a repair professional if you're unsure how to perform any repair or modification safely and correctly. All repairs and modifications are performed at your own risk. As I mentioned in the introduction, I'm replacing the crankshaft position sensor on my 2004 Chevrolet SSR. It has a 5.3 liter LM4 V8 engine, and that was true of the 2003 and 4 model years. The last 2 model years of the 5 and 6 model years had the LS2 6 liter, but I was interested to find out that the reluctor tooth count is the same in both the Gen 3 LM4 engine and also the LS2 engine in the 2005 and 6 model years. So you actually use the same crankshaft position sensor part for all 4 model years of the SSR, and early generation 4 LS2 engines such as in the 2005 Corvette and 2005 and 6 Pontiac GTO, and anything that's the early generation 4 with a 24 tooth reluctor count, and then the later generation 3 have the same exact part number for that. You can check the color of yours. Black is supposed to indicate 24 tooth reluctor count, and the gray color is supposed to indicate a 58 tooth reluctor. So make sure you check you get the right one. The part number that I have here is 125602228, and that's for the GM part number, and the AC Delco is 213-354. I'll have that on the screen and down in the description section, so expand that description section for links to information and those part numbers. So make sure you get the right one for your engine. And to replace this, we need to drop the starter, so I'll have to disconnect the battery to perform for electrical safety. And because I'm disconnecting the battery, make sure that you drop the windows or roll them down on the SSR, or drop the roof so that the windows don't have a problem of not indexing. Without power, they won't index, so if you try to get in and out of the vehicle with the windows up, you could have a problem, because disconnecting the battery will cause the window position to be forgotten by the roof door module. So take that precaution before you disconnect your negative battery cable on the SSR, so you don't run into that problem. So we're going to have to drop the starter, disconnect the battery. Before we drop the starter, when we install this new one, we're going to have to lubricate this O-ring that's on here. So I've obtained some engine assembly lube, or you could use fresh engine oil. But you also want to clean the area before you remove the old one. You don't want to introduce any dirt into this engine from the side block there. So make sure you have something to properly lubricate this before you insert the new one. Removing the old one, you don't want to be too aggressive on side-to-side motion. You just want to twist it a little bit after you remove the 10mm headed bolt that's securing it to the side of the engine block. So you remove that. Remove the electrical connector. Well, I actually have to remove that first, then the bolt, and then you want to twist it a little bit, and it should work its way out pretty easily. We'll find out how that goes. And then on the new one, lubricate this and do the same thing. Once you make sure everything's clean, you insert it and then rotate it just a little bit to get it properly seated. Put the 10mm bolts back in, torque it to 18 foot-pounds, and then reconnect the connector. I'll probably put some dielectric grease in here to make sure that no water gets in here. And since we're under the engine, we're going to make sure we wear safety glasses. Things, oil, grime, dirt, whatever might fall down, especially since we'll be underneath some things. So make sure you wear some safety protection for your eyes so you don't have a problem with that. Some gloves to keep your hands clean. And then at the end of all this, since we replaced the sensor, the service manual states you must perform a crankshaft position relearn procedure. So I've purchased recently an Autel MaxiSys MS906 device, which has bidirectional communications to various submodules in the vehicle, and it also includes the procedure to perform the crankshaft position sensor CKP relearn procedure. So I'm going to take advantage of this device. We'll see how easy it is to perform it with this device. I've gone through the menus manually without performing it, and it seems pretty straightforward, but we'll see once we actually get into it. So with that, I'm going to go disconnect the battery. I've already got the roof down on this vehicle, so I don't have to worry about the windows. They're already all the way down, and of course the roof's already down. That's not a problem. So I'll just disconnect the negative battery cable. No interesting thing to see there, but that's on the back of the vehicle underneath the cargo area. Be it directly underneath the cargo area, or if you put a spare tire on your SSR, it's potentially over on the passenger side behind the rear wheel. So go ahead and disconnect that, and then I'll meet you back underneath the vehicle as we start to drop the starter out. Here's a caution to be aware of. Before you proceed with the following steps, make sure the exhaust system is allowed to cool down to the touch to make sure that you don't burn yourself, since you will be close proximity to the catalytic converter on the passenger side and the engine compartment. So please allow the engine to cool and the exhaust system cool to room temperature before proceeding. The crankshaft position sensor on an LS series engine like this LM4 in my Chevy SSR is located above the starter on the passenger side of the engine block. You can kind of see it in the picture here just behind the left-hand bolt hole there in the picture. But we need to unbolt the starter to move it off to the side. We're not removing the starter from the engine area, we're just moving it off to the side. So I'm using a 13mm socket, which I needed a thin wall socket to get to the bolt on the right there with that plastic cover. I needed a fairly thin socket to get over that without binding too much on it. My original socket just wouldn't fit over it. So make sure you have a fairly thin walled 13mm socket to remove these two bolts. Once you remove the bolts, you should be able to pull the starter out and down, and then pull the starter off to the side. You may need to move some of the wiring harnesses that lead up to the starter just to get it pushed over to the side. I suspended the starter during this operation by using a bungee cord. I attached it to one of the bolt holes, and then I wrapped it around the exhaust pipe just above the forward O2 sensor bunghole welded point, so on the exhaust pipe. So again, caution, you must make sure this area is cold to the touch. You could burn yourself or destroy some items that you're placing in that area. So with that now being pulled out, I'm going to, so you can see the starter gear there, and I'm going to move it off to the side with and suspend it with that bungee cord. We're removing the old crankshaft position sensor at this point. The wiring harness connector I removed in some footage, but that was unusable. So you pull up on the clip that retains it and pull it off. Then you have access to the 10mm bolt that we're removing at this point. And once that bolt is out, you can then rotate in a circular fashion the old sensor, which should fairly easily pull out from its existing position. And there we have it out, and we have the old one out of the engine. Before you install the new sensor, make sure you lubricate the O-ring on the new sensor with some assembly lube or fresh engine oil to make sure that the O-ring has some lubrication so that as it goes into the side of the block, it seats properly and smoothly into the normal location for the O-ring. And then as you're inserting the sensor, make sure you rotate it in a circular fashion a little bit to make sure that it snaps into place. You can see me actually pulling it back out and then snapping it again to make sure it snaps in correctly. You line the tab hole for the bolt to go through so that you reuse the existing bolt and you get that in place, and then it's a 10mm headed bolt. And you're supposed to torque it to 18 foot-pounds. My torque wrench was just a little too long to be useful in this situation, so I used a 10mm socket and a 3/8 inch ratchet drive for my socket set, and I torqued it to medium hand tight, which should be in the 15-18 foot-pound range, and you don't want to over-torque it. I'm adding some dielectric grease to the connector to make sure no water intrusion occurs for the 3 wires for this. I usually do that for anything on the outside, and you basically just insert the connector back into the new crankshaft position sensor and snap it into place. The tab should go over from the pigtail should go over the protrusion from the crankshaft position sensor, and it should just kind of snap into place. And there it's snapped into place. And then let's move on to installing the starter. Installing the starter should be just the reverse of what you did to remove it, but I undid the bungee cord, moved the starter into place, as I'm doing now. Then you take the two bolts that were securing the starter, which are 13mm headed bolts, and then you reinsert those and then torque them to 37 foot-pounds. So you have to move the starter around a little bit to get it in line to get back into the original position. So now it's in the original position, so I'm going to insert the bolts and then secure them. And then I am able to use a torque wrench in this location, as you see me performing that step right here. So with the starter back in place and everything reconnected, we're ready to move upside and go do the relearn procedure for the sensor. Before proceeding with this variation relearn procedure, make sure that you've reconnected the negative battery cable, verify that the engine starts and idles correctly, and you'll need to bring it up to near full operating temperature because the variation relearn procedure does require the engine to be near full operating temperature. We're going to attempt the crankshaft position variation relearn on this 2004 Chevrolet SSR, and I want to make sure that I follow the procedure. It talks about wide open throttle, yet it doesn't really mean that from what I can tell, because I attempted wide open throttle and it just wasn't taking. So I've observed some other CKP relearns, and I think I have it figured out now. So let's go ahead and go into GM. Connected to the vehicle now. And let's do automatic selection. I wanted to read the VIN information. That's correct. And this is a Chevrolet SSR, but it's picking Trailblazer EXT or SSR. It's an SSR, but and the SSR is based on the Trailblazer EXT, but we'll pick SSR. And that is correct. So I'm going to go into diagnosis. And first we're going to check for any error codes. It's going to go through the various subsystems in the vehicle looking for any. I didn't have any when I turned off the engine, but we'll see if we have any at this point in time. So, nope. So we're okay there. And I'm going to perform a special function and selected the special functions. We should rev it no more than 4,000 RPM. So let's continue. Continue. Lock the drive wheel, set the parking brake, which it is set. Do not apply the brake pedal. Cycle the ignition from off to on. Apply and hold down the brake pedal. Start and idle the engine. Turn off the AC. There is no AC on. Vehicle must be placed in park neutral, which it is. Now we're going to accelerate from the idle to the 4,000 RPMs. I have the brake pedal still applied. All right, it did the fuel cutoff. It says learn status learned. This ignition, press escape. All right, we've completed that process. Now we're going to go through and we're going to have it scan for codes again. So let's do an auto scan. Because if it didn't actually learn it, or if there was a problem, it should have stored a code in the powertrain, but it did not. So it looks like we successfully had it learned. And there are no error codes in anything else. All right, we're done. Here's a suggested final checklist after this repair procedure. Make sure all the tools have been removed from the repair area and put away. Test drive the vehicle and make sure that there's no new check engine light. Use the scan tool that you used for the crankshaft position sensor variation relearn to look for any stored DTCs, and then be aware that the readiness monitors will have reset with the battery being disconnected for this period of time. So if you're going to get a smog check, let those complete before you go get a smog check. Recheck the area around the new crankshaft position sensor after a period of time, let's say 250 or 500 miles, just to make sure that you're not leaking any oil. And of course, check it after a couple trips just to make sure you're not initially leaking. Make sure that O-ring's seated properly and is not leaking any oil. And of course, reset the date time of any clock in your radio head unit and re-index the side windows, because disconnecting the battery will cause the roof door module on the Chevy SSR to forget the index positions for the up and down positions, so re-index that, and check that out in my other video for the Chevy SSR. Thanks for coming to the channel. Hope you enjoyed watching the video. Hope it helped you out. If it did, please subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. And come back to the channel for more information like this for your Chevrolet SSR. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, smash that like button. If this is the first time you stop by the channel, please click the subscribe button to the right. It's free. Click that bell notification to get notified when I upload new videos. Follow Retro Car Guy 530 on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Patreon. Thanks for coming to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.